Good evening and welcome to ICAS Fall Symposium Poseidon. I'm Shinja Kim, President and Chair of ICAS, and thank you for all joining us our program today. It's my pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker, Admiral Jonathan Greenert, on the topics with a particular emphasis on challenges and threats to regional security, China's gray zone operations in the East and South China Sea. Admiral Greenart currently holds the Charlie Chair in Security Studies at the National Bureau of Asian Research. The Charlie Chair's charter is to inform the public and USG policymakers regarding global security with an Indo-Pacific focus to help shape their perspective through objective studies, presentations, and interface, and also to influence their decisions by providing the timely, objective, and nonpartisan analysis. As a native of Butler, Pennsylvania, Admiral Greenart graduated and commissioned an ensign in the U.S. Navy in June of 1975 with a major in ocean engineering in U.S. Naval Academy. Having completed studies in nuclear engineering and entering the nuclear submarine force, managing and supervising naval nuclear reactor system, his service in submarines culminated in command of the submarine USS Honolulu SSN 718 in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. John served 40 years in the U.S. Navy during his career, and he spent 20 years in the Asia-Pacific region leadership positions, living in Japan, from which John observed China's military evolution. Since then, he served as the Chief of the U.S. Navy CEO from 2011 to 2015 and retired from military service in October 2015. Currently, John serves as a director, advisor, and consultant for companies and firms, and he is widely known as a terrific leader and a fabulous boss among his cadre of friends and colleagues. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Admiral Greenart. So, hope you enjoy the program, and let's welcome the Admiral. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shinja King. That was a wonderful introduction, which I didn't earn, but I do appreciate it. And I want to thank Sanju for making this possible when we met in August and talked about China. I will speak to you today, not as really a student of China so much as an observer. As my bio has explained, I'm a career officer and observer, but I have watched the PRC evolve to what we have today. I've interfaced with my counterpart when I was Chief of the Navy, Admiral Wu Xingli, whose name means victory, and he reminded me at every interaction. And he came to the US 2 times, and I went to China 2 times to look each other over and look over our respective navies and where we're coming from. Today, I'll give some remarks and talk about, excuse me, as was mentioned, the gray zone operations. There might be a better name for that, but that's what we call them right now. Non-armed conflict operations taking place in the East China Sea and to a certain extent in the South China Sea. My focus will be on the East China Sea, and I'll tell you why I think that's important. As was mentioned, and to everybody's comes from really, their outlook comes from their biography. I think everybody understands that. And 15 of my 40, that's a 40 years in the Navy, I spent in the Indo-Pacific. I was either in Hawaii or in the Western Pacific. For our colleagues, and good morning, out in Japan and Korea, my family and I had the pleasure of living in Japan 2 times, and it deeply affected our children who each studied China, 3 of them, all studied Chinese to a certain extent, and all, of course, Japanese. We lived on Guam, which is at the time we weren't sure it was going to be such a good deal, but it has helped us understand a great deal about the importance of Guam and what we're trying to do there. My operational tours, which affected what I'm about to say, are Deputy Commander of the Pacific Fleet and as Chief of Staff, and then eventually the Commander of the 7th Fleet. I was at PAC Fleet Headquarters 2002 to 2004, commanded the 7th Fleet from 2004 to 2006, and then, as was mentioned, the CNO to 2011 to 2015. So I took the Shally Chair from Tom Fargo. Many of you know and admire him, in 2016, and it's a privilege to be with the National Bureau of Asian Research. So what I've seen with China, if you go from the 90s through the 2000s, a rapidly growing but relatively quiet, at least Navy, except for those Taiwan incidents and threats we're all familiar with in the 1990s, particularly in the 1996 incident. We were there on our flagship, the Blue Ridge, in 1998 when I was the Chief of Staff, watching the turnover of Hong Kong and the garrison, the Chinese garrison, come in what could best be, come into Hong Kong, what could be best be described as looking like UN uniforms, nice and docile, no guns. They were just as trying to be as quiet and as cooperative as possible. How things change. Port visits just increased after that. We were in not only Hong Kong, but Qingdao, Shanghai, and other ports, as cooperation was seemed to be the watchword of the day. And I remember, and I just remind folks, in 2005, we were doing dual carrier operations to the west of Guam, demonstrating how we can bring together 2 carrier strike groups, 150 tactical aircraft, and we had the allies there. And we had a Chinese delegation on both carriers spending the night, overnight there, showing them the value of carrier operations. I think our high point was, in my mind, was in 2014 when we had the PLAN with 4 ships join us in RIMPAC, Rim of the Pacific exercise off in Hawaii. They took a port visit to Pearl Harbor and conducted exercises, mostly humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, but they took part in a gunnery exercise. And we pretty near had a missile exercise, but that was just a pole too long for us to get approved through probably a wise idea. And predominantly, they did their best work in an anti-terror exercise that we put together. After that exercise period in 2014, Admiral Wu Xingli attended for the first time, representing China, the International Sea Power Symposium in Newport, Rhode Island, September 2014. That was number 21, and had a meeting with Admiral Kawano, the Chief of the Maritime Staff of Japan, where we all collectively talked about how we were integrating and applying the code for unplanned encounters at sea. Basically, the bottom line, to prevent, put protocols in place to prevent miscalculation and collisions at sea. And we had plans to apply them to the air. So things were going very well. You might recall President Xi and President Obama met in June of 2013 at Sunnylands. And that frankly got things going for all our events in 2014. Meanwhile, about 2012 to 2015, China starts building the islands, if you will, on reefs in the South China Sea. The dashed line becomes a common topic, a common debate, common argument. China decides they're going to stand up their own air defense identification zone, which is way larger than probably was reasonably expected. Although President Xi said no militarization of these facilities, although Admiral Wu Xingli told me no offensive operations will take place, we eventually ended up with what Admiral Harris called the wall of sand, and that led to, I think, just in general, a change in the trends. So as I've watched this evolution since these high points, in my mind, and as my time as CNO, I thought to myself, there's probably 3 potential flashpoints there. Who knows what can really happen, but we studied closely potential flashpoint in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, and over Taiwan. But the question is, which of these can we really control? Or did we have control over when we may be involved in it? Or what do we have to do in this case? Which brought to me, why the East China Sea? Why do I think, and why did we at the National Bureau for Asian Research start studying the details of that and these gray zone operations? Because we have less control in that scenario We are committed to an ally in one case, Japan, and what I'll call a partner in another case, Taiwan. There are two treaties, or at least a treaty and an agreement involved. Our mutual defense agreement, Article 5, requires us, when requested by Japan, to provide cooperation and assistance as needed in the case in the East China Sea. And then there's the Taiwan Relations Act. There's no multilateral forum really to diffuse a dust-up or a flare-up there in the East China Sea. We don't have regular ASEAN meetings with an agenda in that area. It's about China and Japan there, and Taiwan really on the periphery. There's no really big UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea discussion there where we could get the two potential combatants to sit down and work it through. And it's just one of those small area and high tension. Two high-end militaries, Japan and China, three high-end economies involved there in the East China Sea with when you include Taiwan. And trying to imagine a global confrontation, the economic depression that we would be subject to when you think of all the contributions today of all of those economies. In my mind, the South China Sea disputes, they really involve 7 nations. ASEAN could address these. That opportunity does exist. Easier said than done, I think we all know. But the United States is not directly involved in any of those sovereign disputes there. We are directly involved due to our position in the world and what we're committed to in the Western Pacific. Even the Philippines, who have a treaty involved with us, even they have kind of gone on the peripheral, even despite the fact that they want to claim in The Hague in a complaint with China. So when you look at the geography and the analysis that's done, we have a small overlapping area. In the case of China and Japan, we have overlapping exclusive economic zones, overlapping air defense identification zones. Tabletop exercises conducted in DC in 2016 and 2019 by CNAS and Sasakawa Foundation found that in the case where you lay a scenario in the East China Sea, the events are fast. They involve likely all domains very quickly. You're involving probably what we're calling the gray zone, non-armed conflict, involving probably the maritime militia, the economic pressure from China on Korea, on Vietnam, on Australia to stay out of it. Cyber will be involved, public relations, public affairs, the media, social media, and certainly there'll be a diplomatic element to it. All those making up what we in the Department of Defense have been brought up to understand to be DIME. Diplomatic factor, information factor, military factor, and an economic factor. So what is this gray zone that I refer to, and why is it a challenge? Well, the gray zone operations have differing legal definitions. What we agree on, and most of the problem is with ourselves as two allies, ourselves and Japan, it's really anything but armed conflict. And it's not really reconciled, gray zone operations versus hybrid warfare with Russia. If you go to hybrid warfare, it's hybrid because it presumes there's military involved at some level, but China has moved to the extent that they've moved out of their defense and into their more domestic law enforcement area, which is exactly where they wanted to go. Some analysts in Japan propose that what you have in a gray zone operation is merely a violation of national sovereignty. Quote, organized use of force by a government, and therefore it's an armed attack, an armed attack is really an egregious violation of the national sovereignty or national intent. And what they're trying to say is, in effect, we, the two governments, Japan and the United States, need to get away from you have to have armed, it has to be armed and it has to be conflict. What you should be moving toward is an understanding of a spectrum of operations, the worst case of which would be armed attack, but what it amounts to a violation of a national sovereignty or national intent, the cooperation of which is against the common defense. So this is a lot of legalistic maybe and chit chat about how do you talk about it. But the evolution of the gray zone in real life over the last 10 years has really, what it has amounted to is China entering the contiguous waters. Now, contiguous waters are those waters just outside the 12-mile limit. Think 15, 16 miles from sovereign territory. Fishing boats harassing the Japanese Coast Guard or our survey ships. That's the way it kind of started, establishing and the overlap of the air defense identification zones. A declaration by China that they will apply domestic law, and therefore use their Coast Guard in international waters, certainly the East China Sea. They'll start using the Chinese Coast Guard and the use of the strategic support forces that they have. And there are examples of them using cyber, space operations, social media, and as I mentioned before, the public media. So what they have been doing for a decade is sort of an iterative fait accompli result to accomplish the goals they need to accomplish, more by coercion or what some think is just inoculation of their presence in and around areas that they view important to them. Now, how can Japan and the US respond? There's a policy approach maybe that I'll mention to you and some operational aspects to it. Well, if one looks at the alliance framework, as I mentioned, the Japan-US Mutual Defense Alliance has an Article 5, which describes cooperation, defense cooperation or security cooperation by the two governments. What we don't really have in place now is a combined, that is the two countries with an intergovernment and an intra-government, or think of whole of government body or a task force to deal with the East Asia situation there in the East China Sea. Right now, we need to get on with reconciling the armed conflict definition, kind of get to the point where we can talk with Japan and work through this idea, get it out of a legal gridlock to allow alliance cooperation in common defense for gray zone operations, be able to delegate that to the appropriate authority. We need to establish and communicate, I hate to use the term, but I don't have a substitute for red lines to China that'll trigger a response in these gray zone operations and demonstrate the will to do it, but allow the means to de-escalate. And I'll speak to de-escalation in just a second. Operationally, we should exercise these Article 5 protocols in our exercise series with Japan, and as necessary with the Quad, if we can pull them all together to do it. We need to definitely improve our intelligence and information sharing. There is an organization or a protocol, most of you have heard of it, Five Eyes, and it is a spectrum of information sharing by 5 countries. There are elements of the Five Eyes, which we have with the UK, with Australia, with New Zealand, and with Canada, that we could apply in this case to Japan, so that we really do have a pure situational awareness of what's going on there. We need to learn to coordinate our cyber response. We, the US and Japan, certainly in defense respect, have very similar, or I would call it parallel, constructs for our cyber commands, but we haven't coordinated response yet, or the means to coordinate that, and we need to move along that. And then there's this term DIME that I mentioned before, coordinate in our exercises the means to do that. In place today, Japan and China, for the in the case of a contingency there in the East China Sea, have an alliance coordinating mechanism that was put in place years ago. But the exercises that I mentioned before, tabletops, would seem to indicate that this alliance coordinating mechanism isn't broad enough, doesn't contain enough elements of the government, and can't stand up and move effectively fast enough for what we believe will be the schedule of events or the course of events that take place. We have in place a co-location of U.S. forces, Japan, and the Japanese Self-Defense Force. So allowing those two commands to now co-locate and cooperate through all phases, from peacetime through the emergence of potential conflict, would be wonderful. We already have in place the acknowledgement that the United States acknowledges that the Senkaku Islands are of Japanese territory in the case of the Mutual Defense Treaty. Tactically, we need a full-time staff to work on this during this phase 0. We need to organize, train, and equip our forces for gray zone operations. We don't do that, we don't exercise it. Well, what am I talking about? I'm talking about non-kinetic means to stop a merchant ship, stop a fishing fleet, be able to jam communications and interrupt operations without, again, the kinetics involved. Tactically, we need to delegate the appropriate entity to act on behalf of the U.S. government and the government of Japan. Is it Indo-PACOM that will take charge there? Is it U.S. Forces Japan? Do we need to bring it back to Washington since it's so broad and have the lead be the Department of State, since it involves so many elements that they oversee, or the Department of Defense? It's really unclear right now, and all the characteristics of what a confrontation would be tell us that we need to move. That the current process won't work in time, and we, as I mentioned before, need to demonstrate those kinetic and non-kinetic measures that I mentioned we should organize, train, and equip to. So last point, and then I'd love to move to questions. What are the strategic implications of China's gray zone operations, which have been going on and seem to be evolving as we speak and becoming more aggressive? They are operating outside the M in DIME. In fact, it is becoming really an element of last resort. As I mentioned, as they shift to the Coast Guard, they shift to the maritime militia and other means. They're using the D, the I, and the E very well. And that is a shift that we're not aligned well very much. I think there are three, with the emergence of China and their strategic nuclear forces and their modernization, which Stratcom talks about quite a bit. There are some elements of deterrence that I think are evolving, and we're going to have to learn to match up and counter. One, as I mentioned, is strategic deterrence. Strategic deterrence enhances coercion, and in the case of China, up until recently, and maybe as they're looking toward their future, they have always had to wonder, where can this end? In other words, what is the ceiling in on this? And we held the better cards in that regard. They just didn't have a robust strategic nuclear force. Well, they're moving directly in that regard right now. And in the case of space capabilities, and as Stratcom is saying, we need to pay attention to this and make sure it's a part of our nuclear posture review. The second one is deterrence, is the one we're used to more than anything else, and that's the conventional deterrence. That's what the Indo-PACOMs have been talking about. That's what Admiral Davidson has been pushing for a long time in the defense of Guam, to deter the hypersonics, the cruise missiles, the ballistic missiles. They're China's urgency to defeat our U.S. ballistic missile defense and their anti-carrier strike group forces. So this is what PACOM wants to counter, and our best options in conventional deterrence are our alliances, to make sure that Republic of Korea alliance, Japan alliance, and to nurture the Quad as much as possible. Clearly, the ICAS initiative that was just introduced is a great step forward. The changes that the Marine Corps and the Army are doing to anything from land-based missiles to moving to the Pacific is a great example of that. And of course, the initiatives for the defense of Guam. And then the last deterrence that I've been talking about and that our papers really talk to at NBR is the gray zone hybrid deterrence. I bring it up here because, interestingly enough, in the recently signed out tri-service maritime strategy that the Coast Guard, the Navy, and the Marine Corps published, it specifically lists in there that that part of the strategy is to no longer tolerate the iterative advances by China, that we need to show them by virtue of our sea control and our ability to project power that we will no longer tolerate it. It's a great strategy, but how you do it is all about what our papers are saying and how you, again, organize, train, and equip to address that. So let me thank you all again for listening. Let me turn it over to questions. There are a bunch of them out there, and I think I've answered some of them in my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Joe Bosco, go ahead, please.
Joe, I think you're muted still.
Yeah. Okay, turn it on.
I got it.
Good.
How's that?
Good.
Admiral, thank you very much for that fascinating presentation. As you know, several former Indo-PACOM commanders, as well as other active and retired admirals, have commented recently on the potential, the likelihood of some kind of kinetic action on Taiwan. And they've also speculated on the need or the desirability of changing our policy of strategic ambiguity as to whether the United States would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack. I wonder if you'd be willing to comment on either of those notions.
Thanks, Joe. I firmly believe we're not ready to change from ambiguous to unambiguous at this time. And what I mean by that is we don't have all the elements, as I mentioned before, DIME, laid down in what I'll call a campaign plan that runs across our respective departments, including the Department of Commerce, the Department of the Treasury. And we need a campaign first, Joe, in my opinion. How are we going to approach China? And how would we collectively as a nation be able to endure the concept or the idea of conflict? Number one, just conflict, even if it was short, the shock waves, throughout East Asia, there's, as we know, trillions of dollars going through there. How would we deal with that? And if you go from, I think, ambiguous to unambiguous, you start to set a calculating means for China to know much more clearly when we will and when we won't. If we're comfortable with the 3 deterrents, if we're comfortable with a campaign plan, if we're solid with our allies and believe that's the case, then I'd say, okay, we could set that basis down and say, here is our unambiguous approach to this whole thing. Joe, I think until that time comes, it's best to keep them guessing and to feel that, and to keep improving, as I mentioned, the 3 deterrents and make them think that the costs that will be imposed on them are just too much.
Thanks, Admiral.
Joe, do you have a follow-up question?
No, my only concern is that we've been following this policy of ambiguity now for decades, and it has not deterred or dissuaded China from preparing for an attack on Taiwan. This is the problem. If they were willing to preserve the status quo, that's one thing, but they're not doing that. They're moving very, very aggressively, as you know, with all these flights through the Taiwan's ADIZ. And therefore, it seems to me we need to send some kind of a stronger message that they're playing with fire.
Joe, I agree with you on that. All I was saying is before we make a statement, we have to think through what are the possibilities at the other end of that statement and understand the consequences of conflict. I honestly don't think we've done that. All the PACOM commanders, I'm sure they've evaluated where they fit into this. All I'm saying, especially with our examples, if you will, or hopefully lessons learned on other conflicts that we've got ourselves in. It's not just the Mideast, there's a bunch of other elements. And the way the world is, the way our economy is, the way the United States is, I just don't think we're ready for that. I don't disagree with you. We need to get there, but I don't think we're ready for that now.
Thank you, John. Bruce Bennett? If not,
Yes,
Tom Kim. Oh, Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay.
Admiral, should the United States be concerned about the level of sophistication of the newly launched Chinese surface ships and submarines and the level of the Chinese Navy personnel capabilities?
Yeah, I'll answer the last one first. They've got a ways to go before their officer corps and their capabilities, their personnel capabilities are a level where they're ready for sustained conflict. And here's where I'm coming from. They've never or haven't really encountered a lot of big conflagrations. I'm just talking about major collisions and all that. Now, my data, it goes back to when I was active duty. So 6 years, maybe they made a quantum leap. But here's what I'm trying to tell you. When they've had mistakes on their submarines, they've lost them. And just during my time as CNO, they lost 2 submarines, everybody gone. We didn't read a lot about that. I got that from Wu Xing Li. They almost lost a third. And he was on his way. The one time we were together in Qingdao, as I was leaving, he said, I'm very happy. I'm going to go give them medals because what we would know as the executive officer of the ship saved the submarine from major flooding because they went from salt water to fresh water. It's a common thing in submarine. You're going to get heavy really fast when you go into fresh water. So my point is the PLAN is 70 years old. And that's like a baby in terms of, of a military with, especially operating at sea, especially deploying. And now the modernity, if you will, of their ships and their weapons is very, very impressive. I would tell you this, they are kind of upfront, and the fact of the matter is their ships are not built to take a hit. I got a walk on one of their newest frigates again, 2016, or 2015. So that was my last visit. And it was really impressive. And then I looked at the damage control station, and it reminded me of the Carnival cruise I went on with my wife about 10 years before. A gaggle of fire extinguishers, some hoses, and they're not garden hoses, but I think you get my point. And when I accosted my counterpart, I said, what's with that? And he said, we don't really plan to take a hit, my terms, he used another word. I said, why don't you use sound powered phones when you lose electricity? He said, we have multiple levels of electricity we would think of as uninterrupted power. So you got ship's power, then you got battery power, then you got an uninterrupted power for each of those. Well, we know that all goes. I mean, you get flooding, you get a conflict, you get a major hit, and these are just collisions, they go. And so my point is, Bruce, they're very impressive. I kind of think of them as a fighter who really can throw a punch, haymaker and all that, but may not. I'm not sure how many rounds he or she would last. I'm not trivializing what they are at all. I'm just saying there's a balance that one would need to understand. They are greenhorns under the sea. They are currently their operations under the sea. They're trying hard. Would be to get where they need to go to shoot cruise missiles, but not really necessarily to hunt down submarines. So there's other things in the air, but I've gone way beyond just answering your question. But I wanted to give you a perspective. They definitely need to be worried about it. But lastly, Bruce, man, I've had some of the best laptop computers, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Hey, Bruce, do you have a follow-up question?
Well, if you go from there, is there anything about the North Korean Navy that concerns you?
No, except this recent potential launch, a submarine launched ballistic missile. I I would never say that it's survivable, but it really complicates the problem from what we had 3 years ago. So I don't know the truth to what that is, but if that's the case, then somebody turns to somebody else here and said, okay, how are we always going to know where that is? So that if tensions degrade, I need to take that out. Well, that's a whole another kettle of fish. Can be done, but that would be the that's going to take forces, if you will, the application of forces, that weren't doing that. And it's not like we're forces rich. So that worries me a bit with regard to their Navy. Otherwise, the only thing that I've really taken them to, they feel the Navy's would be good for, would be offensive mining.
Thank you. Tong, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Admiral, for doing this for us. Now, I have two questions. One, do you see any utility of dividing strategic dialogue with China between Washington and Beijing on economic and security matters? And also a revival of military exchanges among the leaders like you did. You visited China twice yourself, and your counterpart visited the United States twice. And was it helpful? And so that's the utility of revival of strategic dialogue. Number two question is Colin Powell told Bob Woodward back in June, Kim Jong-un, North Korea, Powell said he was not worried about North Korea because Kim Jong-un of North Korea would not attack the United States, knowing that he would be suicidal next day, knowing the power and capability of the United States has. And then there is some crazy suicidal leaders in history, and that was Bob Woodward's question, and Powell answered, China would stop Kim Jong-un going to attack the United States. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think he had that right, Tong. And I don't profess to be an expert at all in Korea. All I can say is I'm like the person that stayed at the Holiday Express. I visited Korea a lot in my job, and listened. But what I took away from almost every tabletop and they call it ultra-focus lens then, was the most important thing to the North Korea leaders is the survival of the regime. And one of the most important things to China was the survival of the regime and the status quo. And so why? Because they don't want the border crisis. They don't want the refugee crisis. They don't want North Korea to get to lose, to the government to be destroyed, and then the unification of the peninsula. I mean, that's where they take it. And the brief times I've had a conversation with my Chinese counterpart, actually, and after I retired with a group of them, that's sort of where they were. They want to keep things as they are because they don't want a bunch of unrest on their border there. So that's where I am there. Hopefully that's you understand that answer. And therefore, I don't think Kim Jong-un would launch it either unless he thought it was going to be the end of the regime. And then what does he matter? But I think he feels life's pretty good right now, along with the family and all that they have. I believe in dialogue, even with a potential enemy, because I don't know, the only way I know you can shape somebody's movement, opinion, and convince them of something is if you have some sort of interface with them. And I think personal is better. What I learned on the interface, you spend a couple of days with somebody. I'm sure he learned something from me, but the pressure this guy was under to get the carrier going, to get carrier aircraft, because of the 5-year plans going on in China, where I saw him, what I thought was cutting corners on things that we learned the hard way in the USA, these sorts of things. And then to bring them together in any kind of an international forum and have them face everyone else, if you will, where you can get a common approach. For example, China didn't want to sign up for the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea to prevent collisions, and to quit yelling at each other over the bridge to bridge and start talking sense so we don't run into each other and cause a problem for our respective bosses. And everybody thought that was a good idea, except China didn't want to get wrapped into something. And we said, well, it's voluntary. How, there was some logic that eventually applied. The acronym CUES has something to do with a Chinese thing. I don't know what it is, and I forgot. I knew it at one time, but we thought, what a dumb statement, code for unplanned encounters at sea. Well, whatever you want, we'll do it. Sign the paper. And he did, and they complied. And so that's just, to me, a small anecdote of things we learned also with the Soviets when we did INC, prevention of incidents at sea, and getting into having young men and in this case, young men and women, in their mid 30s, making a decision to shoot a missile or a gun and, have this thing blow up and get out of control. I just think we need to prevent that as much as possible. And I think we need dialogue and use international fora at every opportunity to convince China that they're on the wrong track.
Thank you, John. Tom, do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you for your good answer. And I share many of your views. Now, on Quad, how important is it that South Korea may not join the Quad?
Well, I think it's, for now, not that important. I think them not being in it, consistent with where Korea has stood, in my view. But I think, how you hear this Quad +1 and Quad +2, I think where the situation applies, and as we get more maturity with it, I think it can work. Let me give you another anecdote, and I'm not saying it's related, but I'm so old. I remember the Australians said, we will never have the Japanese down here operating in Australia. Well, guess what? That's been happening for the last 2 years. Japanese ships and everything. I remember the Indians saying the exact same thing, that they would never do that. And they are now, and they're getting over it. And so the issues between Japan and Korea, or the issues that Korea may have with any of the other members of the Quad, it takes those of you that worked in the Foreign Service. I have such deep respect for you, because it just takes, you got to grind this stuff through. And here I am making it easy, sound like it's easy. I understand it isn't, but not doing it, I just don't think is a good option.
Well, thank you. Richard White, go ahead. Richard.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Admiral. I find your presentation really interesting, as well as the study. I was wondering if you feel comfortable comparing the Russian and Chinese approaches, if there's any salient differences, and how that might affect your recommendations in so for example, the Yukon theater.
I think it would be a little difficult. I don't think the Russians have figured out, of course, who am I? I'm not a Russian expert, but let me put it to you straightly. When it comes to country, they're a little more blunt. And I think they will be. And I think it'll always involve a military element. But on the other hand, day in and day out, I'm sure they're using non-military aspects to undermine the Ukraine and anybody else that they're working on. Georgia, I noticed we just signed a defense cooperation agreement with Georgia. I don't know what it involves, but that can't help. That can't be good news to Russia. There's the Baltic piece that I'm sure they're working on. I think that there are certainly analogous approaches with regard to NATO and what NATO says they can do and when they would act. An attack on an ally is an attack on all. Well, what is an attack? It gets down to that. You don't want to say, well, let's go get the lawyers now because some bomb just went off, or you know what I'm saying. The missiles are in the air. Not the time to do that. And it's the time to get down to it is now. So I think there's an analogy. I think there is some elements are the same, but from what I have seen so far, China is wanting to move completely out of the defense realm and make it almost sort of like it's a domestic issue in our domestic waters.
Very good. Richard, do you have follow-up question?
No, thank you. That was very helpful, sir.
Okay, very good. And Brent Sadler? Brent? Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the chance to ask a question.
All right.
Admiral Greenart, it's good to see you again. The question I have about the gray zone is, as you look and as you've read the news since you've left the Navy, and based on your assessment, what would you say are the TTPs, the tactics, the type of training, and some of the, if there's any new capabilities that we need to deploy on our ships that would make it a more effective platform from competing in the gray zone, specifically in the South China Sea?
Yeah, I think, there was a time we had all of these. Remember, we were dealing with pirates and we thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have piracy all over the world. We turned to innovation, and we had all kinds of ways to stop your propeller. And, some of them you throw a net on it, but there were others, put goo out there, blaring horns. You get my point. All these sort of non-kinetic, but debilitating, for lack of a better term, effects that you can apply that would say, okay, stop this, and we'll stop you from doing it. They're jammers. So you're starting to get into, if not a cyber realm, an EW realm. And I think, we've got all kind of EW that we apply to seekers on things with gunpowder in them, where we can probably use that same thing. There's a lot of classified stuff to shut down fishing boats, this, that, or the other thing, or merchant, or, so there has to be a cost there, Brent. And that's part of what I was saying. What are the red lines? Hate to use the term, but what are the limits? Say, look, you guys, stop this, quit going in the contiguous. They come back in the contiguous, then you stop them as they approach the contiguous. So you get my point. Or you make it so I can't operate in the contiguous. What you've done, that could be under the sea. There are things. I think we should put those together, take them out there, and show them, quote unquote, we mean business. And it should be done in an alliance, in my opinion, so that the Navy they're up against is a combined Navy. Over.
Do you have follow-up question, Brent?
I guess that would mean that technologies like lasers that are being deployed right now, that's a good thing. Like a lot of the non-lethal technologies that the Marine Corps was developing for use in crowd control, finding a way to get those. These is like the microwave as well as the acoustic. These are things that you would agree would be worthwhile to deploy, and maybe even changing our rules of engagement, of course, in collaboration with our allies in the region.
Exactly. Yes. You got to warn them, in my view, because then it looks escalatory. Yeah, but you set, okay, here are the rules, for lack of a better term. And then you got to have the will to do it. You can't be calm back to whatever. We do this with Iran. I mean, when they bring, UAVs over, we laze them, we blind them, we shoot, we jam some. And so I'm not saying we're exactly there, but we're on the cusp, and you hit the nail on the head. All those things are kind of on the shelf. Pull them off the shelf and use non kind of defense related or unique items to counter what they're doing. Over.
Thank you. Nobuo Tanaka from Tokyo.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Nobuo. All right.
Yeah, when I was chairman of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, I enjoyed participating in a tabletop exercise, hosted by Admiral Dennis Blair, and I learned a lot. And with Dennis, we recommended to the Japanese government to think about holding a nuclear propulsion submarine, not the weapon, but the nuclear only propulsion. Mr. Admiral, do you think it does work, or it does make more sense for the cooperation between Japan and the U.S.? And will U.S. help Japan to build the nuclear submarine, just like AUKUS agreement you have just recently had with Australia?
Well, I think it's worthy of consideration. I would tell you that the ability or the agreement to share sensitive technical nuclear reactor data with Australia, that's not done yet. I mean, I know there's this agreement, but that agreement, as I dig into it and ask our director for nuclear propulsion, so where are you in this? And they said, we're into the, gee whiz, what's the art of the potential doable? In other words, you have to write the request yet. The Atomic Energy Act of 1958 in the United States governs what we can share on sensitive technical information. And right now it's the UK. And that has to do with a security agreement, again, written back in the early days of the Cold War. This would all need to be entered into, again, for lack of a better term, as far as discussion. What is the value? I would be personally surprised if Japan felt the cost of putting together a nuclear propulsion program, because I know the high standards of the self-defense force, and to do it right with the stewardship and all that, and then what would be the gain for all of that? It would surprise me they did that. Their submarine force is so far along in independent air propulsion and all those other items for what they need. I just think it would surprise me. But anyway, you got to go to ground zero and talk about it. I'd just like an info sharing agreement for now between our two governments. That would be, man, that would be a touchdown for me.
Okay, Nobuo, follow-up question?
The nuclear propulsion submarine with regular Tomahawk, I mean, cruise missile, they have a kind of conventional deterrence against China?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know if somebody has stated that. And my point would be this. If you're China, if it's an anti-ship capable Tomahawk missile, then I'd say probably. But if I'm China and I'm serious, I would be amazed if they say, we think the U.S. would attack us, would rain down Tomahawk cruise missiles on us for no reason. Again, deterrent, meaning, they're deterring us from taking that action. We have no policy that would indicate we would do such a thing. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, from the sea, yeah, I think it would be a concern. I'm not aware. I don't have a deep understanding of their ships' counter cruise missile capability. It rolls over and advances so quickly. I know our seekers are quite sophisticated. I don't know how good their defenses are. But I stand by that they don't take hits very well. They're not armored like we would think and like we do and like Japan does. Over.
Thank you, John. Mike Frenchek. Is Mike out there?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
The question I have is, in your opinion, where do we go from competition to crisis to conflict, and how willing would the Chinese be to cross those lines as we go forward? Thank you.
Competition to, what was the second one, please?
Competition to crisis and then to conflict.
Okay. I think we've crossed from competition to crisis. If you put phases of crisis, I think we're in the low phase of that. I think they no longer consider us a competitor. They consider us somebody that they want to be able to defeat by virtue of convincing us that by coercing us, for lack of a better term. We've got to reverse that or turn that or at least stop it. And that gets back to what I call the 3 deterrents. And the nuclear deterrent, I would not trivialize that and say, well, what's that matter? I do think it matters a lot. There's something not making sense in my mind and other people I talk to with the amount of nuclear modernization they're using. It gets back to if they figure, look, I can raise the ceiling, whereas before I know where I would have to stop, because if things started getting worse and worse in the conventional service, we would have the capability, because they'd have a nascent strategic nuclear capability, very modest. We would have a robust and be able to pinpoint whatever we want to do nuclear wise. If they could counter that, then it gets back to their conventional ceiling is much higher. Hopefully that makes sense to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Tom, do you have add-on question?
Not really, but with respect to the need to strengthen nuclear strategic deterrent, I think administration is reviewing nuclear posture from the what was it 2018 review that the Trump administration announced. What areas you think this posture will be updated or strengthened?
Yeah, well, what has to happen is we have to make a decision on our, what they call the ground-based strategic deterrent, intercontinental ballistic missile force. They're too old. They're going to be obsolete soon. Command and control has to be secure. You can't have the ability to breach our nuclear command and control. It has to be secure and reliable. Our submarine force of the future has to be undetectable, survivable, for lack of a better term. And so if we have the precision to deliver nuclear weapons reliably, and that we have a survivable, so you can't destroy it on first strike, then you have what in essence is a deterrence, so that you say, if we ever got to that point, continuing to push conflict with the US would be suicide, because we can't defeat their nuclear forces nor degrade them. And our issue right now is just the age of it. And what the STRATCOM commander is saying is, you need, when you think about to what level you want to modernize and what you want to deter nuclear wise, make sure you take a hard look at China. And by the way, there's the policy statement. Remember, China's not in any of these agreements. When we talk about agreements and limits and everything, it's all about the Soviet Union. Well, I would tell you, I think the likelihood of a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union is very, very small, for all the reasons we already know about. We don't know what we don't know about China right now and where they're going with their policy. It's undeclared or not understood.
Thank you, John. Inhuan, go ahead.
Oh, thank you for taking my question. I have a couple of questions. Admiral, personally, would you be familiar with the Chinese military Bible, like The Art of War by Sun Tzu? How much would you be familiar with that? And the first question. Second question is that in the Navy leadership, would you have a Chinese experts who can think like the Chinese, strategize like the Chinese, fight like the Chinese, so that you can simulate ahead? I have those two questions.
Yeah, the first one is, I've read that book, The Art of War. I can't tell you that if I'm going to give you an exam on it, I'd fail it. But I have read the book. It's worthy of it's on my shelf, and I think everybody ought to look at it because it's good. It's good overall. Your second question, yes, PACOM has, they call it a red cell. Some people call it that. They have different names, and these are Mandarin speakers who spend, a lot of their waking hour, if not at least their workday, sifting through what we would consider, the various trade press and the various think tanks in China, their version of the three service war colleges, the national war college. You get my point. And they just go through everything they get their hands on that is in the open press. And you get a lot, as we know, you get a lot out of that if you study it continuously. And then they get intel feed for what they can pull together. Part of the problem with that is, from what I've seen, if we in Washington, because of who we are looking at the Middle East, and you come in, you want to talk about what China's thinking, you're getting the old proverbial deer in the headlights look, because they aren't thinking that way, because they're unable to think balanced. There's nothing, I'm not trying to criticize them. It's a hard job. But we do need to do that. Now, we say we shifted. And so there's probably Mandarin speakers all over the Pentagon, the policy department, and all that. So you do have to do that. You need to get that red cell, whatever you want to call it, red team, and apply that. And when that's done, remember, they, like us, they'll say, well, this is how we're going to operate. And then the fog of war sets in and complications. And the old, you got a plan, and then you get punched in the face. And so you got to say, okay, what's the next one? So they have that problem too. You see what I'm saying?
Based on the textbook, The Art of War, it's totally based on deception, start to the end. So we have to know about that. That's how they operate. That's how they think. So if you overlook it, you may get a disadvantage from the get-go. So thank you for the question, answers. That was a
Thank you,
good
Ron.
answer.
Thank you.
Joe Bosco, go ahead.
Admiral, going back to the Taiwan question and the question of deterrence, I think you probably know that in the past 42 years, we do send ships through the Taiwan Strait, but in the past 42 years, we've only had 2 carrier transits, in 1995 and in 2007. Why is that, and why do we not send one once in a while, even every 6 months maybe? But why are we keeping the carriers out? China sends its carriers through there frequently.
Yeah, in fact, believe it or not, we sent a nuclear carrier through within the last 18 months. I'd have to go look it up precisely. Part of the reason we don't, it gets into, it's a little pragmatic, but it may not be satisfying. When you do that, and you're going to comply with the international, with UNCLOS, basically, you don't conduct any flight ops. So you have nobody in the air. You have no air cover. You're quite vulnerable. And they really don't like to do that, especially that. So you want to do it deliberately. You kind of have to have the proverbial plan for when you do that. And if you launch anything, because of the overlapping of the ADIZ between Taiwan and China, you're violating somebody immediately. And pick your poison, because you're going to get, a complaint. And you might say, well, that doesn't, so what? We need to send the message. And I'm saying that has been embraced, because we have sent a carrier in recently.
So that's interesting. That has not been publicized. Was that the Kitty Hawk, or which?
I think it was the Reagan. I think it was the 7th Fleet carrier that did it. But I think if we Google it and look for it there, you'll find that it happened recently. I tell you what, I'm so crazy. I think that the Queen Elizabeth went through, but that may be, I may be dreaming here. I could swear, Joe, that she's on deployment, right? She's out there.
Yeah, she's in the South China Sea.
Yeah, I think, but I know we did a carrier recently. And I'm just here to tell you, when I was at 7th Fleet, and we got the word, okay, we want to send, at the time it was a Kitty Hawk, And I was stunned at how naked we felt, or, hands tied there to comply, because we insist we're going to comply or we get a big blast. And they didn't want that. They wanted it to be a professional demonstration, of freedom of navigation.
Right, right.
And it kind of got to that's too damn hard for what you got to give up.
Fascinating. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Tom, do you have follow-up question or follow-on question?
Did you call me, Sangju?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
This is a bonus for you.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah, I appreciate the bonus. Okay. Are we have enough naval force capabilities to deter any provocative aggression from North Korea, especially by their newest nuclear missiles, including submarine launched ballistic missiles they think they have tested yesterday. Are we comfortable with the current defense strategy to stop them from launching any provocative actions?
Well, Tong, I read testimony that the Northern Commander, Northcom, Northern Command Commander said, with regard to a nuclear launch from North Korea to the United States, that our current missile defense system can handle it. He was comfortable with that. However, it's not, it won't be in perpetuity, that it's feasible to feel in the future that it would be overwhelmed by several launches, which is really why we never tried. It's just not for Russia. The whole thing where Russia complains we're going to destabilize it against them. No, they'll overwhelm it. China's there. I can't speak to, because I'm just not familiar with how good our Aegis and Aegis Ashore systems are in the Western Pacific for a shorter launch. I believe we're good. We're covered with Guam. And the whole issue is to detect the launch soon enough, figure out that it is a missile, and figure out quickly that it is headed somewhere you don't want it to head, and that you have the rules of engagement, the authority, the permission to shoot it down, because you got to act pretty quickly when you've got these ships out at sea afloat. If you are further downrange, like in the United States or Guam, you can look at it longer and figure out what you really got there. Does that make sense, what I'm telling you?
Okay, you got it, Tong? Okay, Paul Choi? All right.
Yes,
Go
thank
ahead,
you.
Paul. Yeah.
Admiral, thank you for your time. I have 3 questions. The first is, we previously just discussed more fawns, but to what end? Do you think that would really have a different effect on the Chinese thinking and actions? Number 2, you mentioned very creative tactics, technologies that operators could apply. So is the gap in policy, what do you think is needed with regard to policy change to be more effective in the gray zone? And then 3, there seems to be a disconnect because you continue to highlight the vulnerability of Chinese assets. So where are they deriving so much confidence in being more aggressive in their actions? If they're so vulnerable, you would think that they would have more pause. So then are we not being more strategic in using their vulnerability to our advantage in creating pause in their actions? Over.
I've got it, Paul. I'm sorry, but I had a few blips in your first question, and I don't think I grasped it. Could you please repeat your first question?
Sure. Would more fawns be effective? To what end would we do that?
Yeah.
Over.
Yeah, I think, the FON program, Freedom of Navigation program, has been around for decades. And so just doing that more and more, that's not a strategy. That's using really a program that is in coordination with the Department of State, that using, U.S. policy writ large regarding sovereignty and all that as something to send a strategic security signal. I don't buy into, especially it's like using the M element of DIME. Well, what else are we going to do? Where's the diplomatic piece of this, the economic piece? Well, the previous administration did a lot of the E, and that gets back to, I think Joe might ask the question where I said, I really believe we need a campaign, a broader approach across all of our government agencies. So I agree with you. You can't just fawn your way. They'll figure that out if they haven't already. What I was trying to describe on vulnerability is the fact that it was a choice in the modernization, rapid modernization of the PLAN, that the arming, if you will, and the ability to do damage control and some other elements appeared to be not in concert with how other navies, including the Russian Navy, does business. They very much have an importance to damage control, to fighting through hits, if you will, at sea, which may not come from just another adversary. It could be weather, it could be something else. And I was trying to say that China is untested in that environment of a shooting war, of deploying for long periods of time, or they have deployed, but we would call them around the world cruises that are pretty fun. And you stop, you get fueled, you do receptions and all that, and you move on, as opposed to going all the way somewhere and sitting for long periods of time like we do in the Gulf in an adverse environment. So if I gave the impression that they are much weaker or unprepared, that would be an error on my part. What I'm saying is there are questions about how they do business, and there are vulnerabilities. But I'm with you. In the gray zone area, what we did in our study is we're trying to say is let's figure out where we are. How have we gotten here? Well, we just sort of watched this occur, the boiling frog syndrome, in the East China Sea for a long period of time, and now they're hanging out in the contiguous waters, and they know they read the Mutual Defense Treaty. They know the details. They know that term armed conflict, and they take it to the edge. And what I'm trying to say is what we are encouraging. We've spent some time with PACOM and others and say we need to get it back to the defense policy people and the State Department and get a broader whole of government discussion on what do we do about this, starting with the Mutual Defense Treaty as it is written. Is it effective for what we need it to be now? Because it is likely that China is not going to do armed conflict, certainly if they can gain what they want to gain by other means. Does that help you, Paul?
Thank you. Mike Frenchek, please. Mike?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
With one point of clarification, with the HMS Queen Elizabeth, it was one of their frigates that went through the Taiwan Strait. The carrier did operations East China Sea and South China Sea. Just
okay.
So that's clarified.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe Bosco, go ahead.
Admiral, I have a question on the I part of DIME, the information part. I have a theory that under the Trump administration, when he gave a series of speeches kind of savaging the Kim regime in North Korea, that caught the attention of that guy, and implied the implication of many of Trump's speeches was that regime is unfit to govern. So there was kind of a message that we might consider a regime change. I think it got Kim's attention, and he agreed to to meet with Trump and at those unsuccessful summits. Do you think that there's value in sending that kind of a message, perhaps to China itself, that the international community is dissatisfied with the governance of China? It's up to the Chinese people who governs them, but of course they don't have that choice now. But if we even sent a message that we're thinking in those terms, would that send a chill up Xi Jinping's spine and he might be a little bit more reasonable?
That could be one outcome. I think we need to, as they say, tabletop that one. What are the other scenarios? I do think it would be a great idea to use social media to figure out how to get in there and have to do what you said. Have the Chinese people, young people, not just reading their propaganda, because these people are smart. They love goods. They've tasted the tasty wine of capitalism and all that's going on in the Western. They still send their kids here to study, and they look west for so many social and other things. So feed that element of it and keep harping on how they're being limited. I hate to use too much of the term suppressed, but I think that's probably a reasonable term, to be, as they say, all they could be, and that their trends are slowing down. People that study this and populations say that will be unsatisfactory to them. They've tasted the good life of middle class.
Very good. John Buckley, you want to jump in? John?
Well, I did have a question, and it goes into the, you talk about the gray zone. Do you see a bigger role for the Coast Guard and that policing maritime community across the countries? Yeah,
I do. In fact, we did these two studies, John, that I'd mentioned at the National Bureau for Asian Research, and one of our colleagues in the studies writ large is Takashi Saito, who was the former chief of their Navy and their chairman. And he is looking at what is the Japanese Coast Guard doing? What are their rules of engagement, their capabilities, and who controls them? How do they coordinate with, first, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, and then how do we get the respective Coast Guards? We'll start with the two commandants, or commandant, I don't know what they have, a directorate. You can see the problem. We don't even know what. Get them to work together like, and Nirvana would be to get them close like we are with the JMSDF. And then you get a four-way coordinated communication. China doesn't have that yet, even with their Coast Guard. I think they're definitely moving in that direction. Again, I was talking to this Wu Shengli back in the day, and I said, I'd like to meet with your Coast Guard commandant, if you don't mind. I'm trying to figure out where's he coming from? What's the command and control feature? Because I want to go back and tell my commandant if it's of value for those two to meet, the same reason, so we don't have a miscalculation. Because our Coast Guard's going to deploy. We had not nearly enough ships for them to deploy back then. They have more now, not what they need, but enough more such that they will deploy. And they've permanently stationed, rotationally stationed, our Coast Guard has some of the ships in the Western Pacific and in Hawaii, so they will deploy more. Long answer, sorry, but a whole host of things have been working in that direction. And as we speak, Saito really wants to answer the Coast Guard questions, Japan, U.S., and what the art of doable is, because they're building up their Coast Guard. Japan is. They don't want the first interaction with any military, militia, fishing boat, or Chinese Coast Guard to be a gray hall, because if you do, you're at that level now, right? It's at that potential escalatory situation, and so they want to get the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force out of that early stages, for lack of a better term.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Choi, it's a bonus to you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Admiral, just shifting to, you made a comment about the U.S. not being resource rich, and that's the reality of the world that we live in. How could we improve ally contributions, right? Our alliance cooperation. Where do you think, particularly Japan and Korea, could invest more in that they might not be? And are we kind of dividing and conquering enough? Are we distributing roles and responsibilities enough? Over.
Yeah, Paul, I'm a little hesitant. I hadn't really thought about what they aren't investing in and then that they should. If I were to say any, it would be networks, the ability to network their respective navies individually. That would be an intranet. And then to be able to join an allied network that we would agree on. And the we would be Australia, Republic of Korea, Japan, and the US. And then I just don't think India is willing or ready for that. But, excuse me, what we need to do, in my opinion, is to show some damn reliability in our policies and our discussions. For example, I don't think the opening conversation should be, I'm paying too much damn money in host nation supports. That's not where you start the conversation. That's a stupid topic to take up at that high a level. That's working group stuff, budgeteer. Let the budget people work on that. And so I think we're on a good track. The way the Quad did what they did recently, just operating together. I mentioned the Australians being very interested in bringing India and Japan into their exercise. More of that consistent, reliable, work toward information sharing. We are the biggest fly in that ointment, however you want to do. That is just our bureaucracy. If we start working in that direction, you can see how ICAS came together fairly fast. When that story is written, it will be interesting. I don't have all the detail, but what I know about it came together pretty fast because some of the right people in the country started talking together and said, well, yeah, this was kind of sitting underneath the surface. And yeah, I'm in for that. I think we could do more of that. That would be of great concern to China. I think their biggest concern is the alliances all getting aligned, for lack of for overusing the same term, against where they're going. I think that would give them great pause.
Very good. Thank you. Nobuo Tanaka?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let Nobuo go ahead first, then Joe Bosca.
Yeah, well,
Nobuo.
Admiral, my question is that the Chinese capability, naval capability, is surpassing the United States within 5 years. Is that a reason for that chance of attack to Taiwan? Do you agree with this statement?
If China's algorithm or their calculation as to when is the appropriate time to resolve the Taiwan situation, whether it be blockade, coercion with ballistic missiles, you know what I mean, or an invasion. If it is capability, then I would say, okay, that's a reasonable combatant commander conclusion. And I think what they were trying to say is that what they would be capable of doing. But the calculus gets to, we were capable of invading Iraq. That was easy. Mission accomplished. Well, wait a minute. There are stories out there where there's the military aspect of it, and then there's the, okay, but what's the end state you want, and can you get to that? I'm really wondering. I've only been to Taiwan twice. The last time was in 2018, and just looking around, I'm just trying to imagine anybody trying to invade that place if they said, no, we don't want this. Again, you can defeat the military and all that, but that's not the end of it. If the insurrection that could be brought up and the guerrilla operations, and I'm sure you've heard of the porcupine, strategy. An effective strategy, you'd say, I don't think this is worth that. But back to I would agree. Yeah, once they have that capability, you would have to use that conclusion to say they appear capable, which was that to me addresses the deterrence thing. It might appear they're no longer deterred conventionally. So now what? There are other elements to this, but hey, that was an important piece that we thought kept them on the other side of that strait.
Thank you, Joe. Go ahead.
Admiral, two operational questions on the question of deterrence. How would you feel about an HADR, humanitarian assistance disaster relief operation with Taiwan? And the second question is, should Taiwan be invited to participate in RIMPAC?
Yeah, I'm saying yes to both. I think the first one should be described as a pragmatic approach to the reality of it. I would be careful on the timing, and just, you don't want to do that when there's like 5 other things that are going wrong, so that it looks like there's a trend here, we're headed to some. But if not, then it's say, yeah, hey, look. So that to me would make sense. And then I would bring them to as an observer, because we bring a whole host of people to that as an observer, and I'd start that off and then work my way to others. I'm so liberal on this. I'd consider, well, what does it take to bring China back to RIMPAC, and let them see that when you see 14, no, there's not 14 nations, I'm sorry, 10 or 11 nations working together on something, and you're the outsider to this, which is kind of what happened in 2014. And then you realize they went and did a gunnery exercise, and China thought, we'll show them, we'll hit the bullseye every time. Well, they didn't. They were above the average, but they weren't quote unquote above average and excellent. They weren't the best. And there's just little things like that, Joe, that if they sit around and convince themselves we're the best, and then they might do something stupid like make a go at it. And that's my point.
Thank you. Inhuan, do you have any bonus question to the Admiral?
Oh, thank you. My general question is that Chinese have different norms than us. It's difficult to communicate in the same term in terms of way of thinking or ethical matters. There are so many things that we need to worry about, in fact. So we need to be more familiar with Chinese culture, tradition, way of thinking, and so on. I'm from Korea 50 years ago. My concern is that how U.S. will handle Chinese, the 1.4 billion people. That's huge. So I hope that Navy will effectively contain the Chinese, spread out, and then those kind of unethical things and out of range thinking and so on. I'm very, very concerned. The world may not be safe. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. I'm taken to a brief conversation. Again, I imagine this Wu Sheng Li. So we were having dinner. He was visiting the U.S. and I said, "Man, I'm struggling to get enough women in the Navy." I was telling him about our demographics, having an all-volunteer force, because they've been instigating integrated in all-volunteer force. So I said, we're trying to get women in as many parts as we can. That was number one. Number two, I said, when our admirals retire, they have to seek a second career. I mean, they don't retire. Their pension is not big enough. And sometimes you can't keep people to stay in the Navy because they want to go get that second job. And so the retention is a challenge with generals and admirals. And I said, "Well, how about you?" And he said, "We got women everywhere. They're in all the positions," which was a lie. They didn't have any. They were admin people at best. And he said, every general and admiral is so proud to be in the Chinese military that they'll stay as long as we want, and they live the good life afterward. And like shortly after that, there was this big blow up where they had a huge amount of people cheating and stealing and ethical failures left and right on the Chinese Navy. So to your point, they have the same problems we do demographically. In fact, they're worse. And so again, getting with people and knowing that and studying that could be a crack. That could be something that we use to look for in the future.
That's a great answer. Ken Moriyasu, go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Ken
Okay.
from Nikkei Asia. As we look towards the global posture review, Admiral, if you had 3 wishes and you could choose any base you want or have any wish you want, how would you change the posture to strengthen deterrence in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, that's really a good point. Well, first, I would change the way we distribute our forces. I would take it from what the combatant commanders ask for. Everybody has to try to meet. I would shift it to these are the amount of forces we can rotationally deploy from the United States around the world and keep all of those forces, and it's all the services, and keep them ready and sustainable so that all the airplanes would live their life. You get my point. And so we don't wear them out prematurely and wear the people out. That'd be one. Two, I'm a forward deployed person. I mean, I was just affected by being in Japan. I would look very closely at allies. And so our subject is the Indo-Pacific, allies and partners who would be willing to deploy like we do, forward deployed naval forces like we do with Japan, and to a certain extent Korea and Singapore. And I would look to expand that. Then I would look to partners who would allow us to rotationally deploy, like Australia. We forget maybe Australia offered us to bring Marines into Darwin. And the ICAS will more than likely result in nuclear submarines down in Fremantle, in Perth, in southern Australia. There are airfields, it goes on, that in Thailand, man, I would have forces all over the place out there. And then China would say, "You're trying to contain me." And I'd say, "Yep." I wouldn't say it directly to their face, but that'd be precisely. So the bottom line, Ken, is I would, if we've got 20 ships, which is the ballpark number, forward deployed, I'd try to see if we get that to 30, 35, requisite number of aircraft. You get my point. Because we don't have near enough forces to respond quickly. And that's underlined quickly.
Can I just follow up on that?
Yes, go ahead. Follow up.
On the first point, when you say you would ask for allies to forward deploy with America, are you saying, for instance, the British or the Australians also based in Yokosuka? Is that the kind of image you're talking about?
Well, I didn't say it right, but your point was a good one. Number one, I would ask who among the allies would take more ships and more of our people forward deployed. and I'd work on a new host nation support. Given that the situation out there isn't what it was 70 years ago, or 50 years ago, 20 years ago, you get my point. It's not nearly as stable. But number two, a good point, you can see the Queen Elizabeth deploying, and they have Prince of Wales. We have Charles de Gaulle. Italy has a carrier. I would look to all of those big deck forces, Japan's building it, and say, hey, everybody, why would we deploy independently and maybe haphazardly? Why, if we need a carrier in the Gulf, why couldn't the Prince of Wales be the carrier in the in the Arabian Gulf, in the Persian Gulf? And that's it. Because you know what, the mission is the same, if you will. We all agree with the mission. You get my point. And then we could cross deck aircraft, because we've done that. The French brought the Charles de Gaulle in the Gulf for us, and we were able to move our carrier out and go get maintenance done. And we left early, and that was a good deal, but it happened once. And we never really worked to coordinate those. Does that make sense what I'm trying to tell you? So think of global deployment, being a principled, nations of same principles and policies working that, rather than just the U.S., because we're not that rich with forces to do that. We don't have a bunch of our people in the Mideast now, so I don't see why we have to have a bunch of our ships there just in case of it, if that's not the case.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John. This is a great session. Time is up. And ladies and gentlemen, the proceeding is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank
you, Jonathan. We'll get back to you.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
All right.